I can't stop checking how my belly looks in the mirror, how it pokes out over my jeans.
I'm not proud of this body at all.
When my anxiety is bad, my eating disorder acts up.
Growing up, I hated my body. I felt gross.
I have been struggling with disordered eating since I was 13.
If I control my food, then I can control the pressure and the strain that's going on around me. That is a big thing for me.
And I still do struggle with body image and staying away from the bad eating habits that I had.
The last few weeks for me have been really challenging emotionally, mentally, physically.
All of these people have something in common. They all have an eating disorder. But there's something else.
We're here? We're queer?
In case you haven't noticed, I'm a gay man.
I like girls as well as boys.
I am a transgender man.
My name's Iona and I'm gay.
The ACE agenda.
I fall in love with a person's soul, not their gender.
You may not realise it, but every day you possibly pass hundreds of people with eating disorders. That's because an estimated 1.25 million people in the UK and 30 million people in the US have an eating disorder. And there's one group of people in particular that are disproportionately affected.
LGBT plus people are at a significantly higher risk of eating disorders. Up to 42% of men with eating disorders identify as gay or bisexual. 16% of transgender college students have reported having an eating disorder. Bisexual women are more likely to develop an eating disorder. 1/3 of LGBT plus people say they have had suicidal thoughts due to their body image.
My name is Robert Green. I'm a gay man, and when I was 19, I was hospitalised with anorexia. At the time, I was still in the closet, and my sexuality was never addressed during my treatment. But I've always been convinced that hiding my sexuality contributed to my eating disorder. So I want to know why eating disorders are so prevalent in the LGBT plus community. What impact do they have on the lives of LGBT plus people? And what, if anything, can be done to reduce the prevalence?
So an eating disorder is a coping mechanism. You know, it is an unhealthy coping mechanism, you know, that is of detriment to the individual.
Anorexia may be the most well-known eating disorder. It's actually probably the least common. And bulimia, and particularly actually binge eating disorder, are much more common. The studies that we do have suggest that the prevalence, particularly amongst gay and bisexual men, is a lot higher than the prevalence amongst heterosexual men. We also know that the prevalence of eating disorders amongst the trans community is very high.
Hello.
This is me, age 2. I always remember feeling different growing up, and from a very young age, I was bullied for being gay, even before I fully understood my sexuality. The anxiety around hiding my sexuality and being bullied took its toll on me, and I developed an eating disorder in my teens. I was eventually hospitalised when I was 19, and when I was in hospital, I felt completely alone. I kept a diary, and in it I wrote, "My mind is all over the place. My thoughts are racing. I'm spending every moment of every day thinking about this disorder. I cannot stop. Help me." Now that I know that eating disorders are so common in the LGBT plus community, I want to speak to other queer people about their experiences and see if they too can see a connection between their sexuality or gender identity and their eating disorder.
I just felt humongous.
I didn't feel like I had control in my life.
It's just awful. You can't see a life outside of food, calories.
I wanted to feel empty. I wanted to control everything. It just took over my life in a way that nothing really ever has.
The point where I actually developed my eating disorder, I was 10.
All of my teenage years was
bulimic and anorexic.
I was officially diagnosed with orthorexia in my second year of university.
I started developing an eating disorder at 13.
I wouldn't just say the eating disorders affected my life, they essentially took complete control of my life.
I can't deal with this every single day. I just can't.
You know technically that everyone around you cares about you and wishes you well and stuff. You sort of just, you do go against that because of the disorder, because it kind of starts making decisions for you.
I became extremely isolated. I was quite paranoid as well.
I just was on my own, feeling really depressed and like stopping myself from really doing anything at all. It made me depressed and it made me anxious constantly.
Everybody with an eating disorder will relate to two things. One, it's not actually about the food, because number two, it's a crutch. It's an emotional crutch, so you can just numb out whatever it is that's going on.
If I am with a man or if I am with a woman, I'll never not be bi. If you had have asked me a couple of years ago if my eating disorders were in any way linked to my sexual orientation, I would have said absolutely not. But the more I think about it, it could have been quite related to that feeling of being trapped and not in control of my love life or my sex life.
I remember just making this awful generalisation that anything to do with sexuality is just god awful and I must just starve it all down. I think a lot of people would be able to relate to that from an LGBT perspective.
Being queer and Muslim, these two things that I felt couldn't come together, I found other ways to kind of try and control my life or control an aspect of my life, and it manifested in eating.
I mean, it was a way for me to kind of like press reset on the kind of person that I was when I was very, very unhappy with myself and the way that other people perceived me in my early to mid-teens.
Coming out to my family really impacted me, and I think a way for me to find control and to cope was by restricting what I was eating.
My process of getting on testosterone and like physical transition was very complicated, and I felt like I didn't have control at all. So one way I got control of my life was through food and stuff like that.
We are in an age where mental health and mental illness can be talked about way more freely, but especially with dudes, eating disorders are not talked about.
My mum took me to the doctor when I was probably about 14 or 15, and the doctor said, oh, you don't need to worry about him, boys don't get eating disorders.
There is so little support for people with eating disorders. Like, it sometimes feels like you have to be on your deathbed to get any kind of help.
Not feeling like you have to deal with everything alone, I think that would help a lot.
Being listened to by healthcare professionals is also important, because the statistics say otherwise.
At the moment, unfortunately, adult eating disorder services are massively underfunded. There are also no waiting time targets, so government brought in targets for children and young people. There are no such target for adults.
It's quite clear from speaking to experts and people who have experienced eating disorders that health services are not catering for the LGBT+ community. I've been told that there is a lack of research, that healthcare professionals are not trained for the needs of LGBT+ people, and that services are underfunded. I put these claims to the Department of Health and the NHS, which declined an interview but did provide the following statement.
Every person with an eating disorder, regardless of their sexual orientation, should have timely access to specialist care. We want mental illness to be treated the same as physical illness, so we're transforming mental health services with a planned record spend of £12.1 billion in 2018-2019, and at least £2.3 billion extra in real terms a year by 2023-2024, as announced in our NHS long term.
There's no doubt that healthcare has a vital role to play in the prevention of eating disorders. But for LGBT+ people, prevention is not just a healthcare issue, it's a societal issue.
The acceptance of LGBT people is happening in places like London, it's happening in like Manchester and places like that, but for LGBT people in small villages, LGBT people who are coming from Asian or Black communities, it's still not there as much, and I think it's sort of down to people of our generation, my generation, the younger generation, to just be more aware and be more openly supportive of LGBT people, because it can be scary.
Coming out not just as LGBT+, but coming out also as having an eating disorder is crucial in breaking taboo.
I like to, on my YouTube channel, talk about things I've dealt with as well, so things I may have experience with, and then I think I can more easily help other people.
I wish that we were able to talk about those kinds of things a lot more, because I think there are still a load of stigmas around eating disorders.
If my story and experiences can help just one person stand up and approach someone and say, do you know what, I heard this girl talking and some of what she said really resonated with me, so I would really like to, you know, explore avenues to try and get help. That's what makes it worth it for me.